cold dawn had barely touched the tops of the ancient cedars when the first faint crack of dry brushwood broke the pristine silence of the old taiga. A gray-haired seasoned wolf with an ash-gray scarred coat twitched the tip of his torn ear. His amber eyes, usually half-closed in sleepy wisdom, flashed sharply from under his drooping eyebrows. He lay almost indistinguishable from the gray moss and granite boulders at the foot of a mighty, uprooted tree, not far from the abandoned hut of his late master, the hunter Mikalich. 3 long years had passed since Mikalich had gone on his last journey, leaving Sedoy alone with the silent taiga. The wolf became its invisible ghost, a shadow gliding along the animal trails. But the memory of the man who had shared his meager dinner and the warmth of his hearth lived on in his heart like an unquenchable fire. And he instinctively returned to this desolate piece of land, where the faint scent of his master still lingered. The crackling sound repeated, this time closer, clearer, accompanied by an unfamiliar, disturbing bouquet of smells. A pungent mixture of diesel fuel, cheap tobacco, sweat, and something else. Something cold and metallic that the wolf unmistakably associated with danger. He remembered that smell. It was the smell of the poacher's traps that had mercilessly maimed his fellow wolves. The smell of the weapons that had taken the lives of many forest dwellers and once nearly taken his own, leaving a deep, jagged scar on his left side that ached when the weather changed. The gray-haired man, slowly, without a single unnecessary movement, rose to his powerful, though emaciated, paws. His large, lean body moved with grace and strength surprising for his advanced years. He was old, but his muscles still remembered the elasticity of deadly leaps, and at times the primitive fury that had once forced even the master of the taiga, the bear, to retreat, awakened in his veins. Now he was driven by a different force. Centuries of caution honed by instinct and that almost human understanding that Mikalich had so valued and cultivated in his faithful companion. He slipped silently into the thick undergrowth, disappearing among the trunks and shadows, becoming an invisible observer. After several agonizing minutes, 2 heavy off-road vehicles covered in a layer of dried mud roared and screeched onto the barely visible forest road leading to the remote village of Zayimka. They violated the silence, their engines roaring hoarsely, their wide wheels mercilessly tearing up the forest floor, leaving behind ugly, deep ruts, scars on the body of the taiga. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested in knowing where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's begin. 4 men got out of the stopped cars, slamming the doors loudly. The first to step out, his legs spread wide, was a man of about 40, solidly built, with a massive, bull-like neck and a face that looked as if it had been roughly carved from stone. His small, deep-set, cold eyes quickly scanned the surroundings with the tenacity of a predator. It was Borov, their leader. He was followed by 2 others, one tall and wiry, with a thin mouth that was perpetually twisted into an unpleasant grin, who was called Whip. And the second, stocky, incredibly broad-shouldered, with an empty, expressionless gaze known as Mute. The fourth, young and fussy, remained at the wheel of one of the cars. Sedoy did not have time to get a good look at his face. The strangers behaved arrogantly, talking loudly, their voices rough and unpleasant, cutting through the ears accustomed to the harmony of forest sounds. Gray-haired caught snatches of phrases in which the words, "old man," "stone," and "let's turn back quickly" flashed by. The acrid, almost stale smell of gunpowder emanating from their worn clothes mingled with a heavy stench of cheap tobacco and machine oil. The wolf tensed his whole body. These people brought trouble with them. He could feel it with every fiber of his being. He saw it in their mannerisms, like those of seasoned predators, heard it in their sharp, cold voices, and felt it in his gut, which had never failed him. Meanwhile, in the village of Zaimka, nestled on the picturesque banks of the Svetlitsa River in the taiga, life went on at its usual leisurely pace. Alenka, the 8-year-old granddaughter of the local healer Yereme, a lively and curious girl with cornflower blue eyes, was just returning from the old, crooked hut of Mikalik. She was carrying an empty wooden bowl. She was secretly feeding Sedoy, without her grandfather seeing, who, although he did not forbid it, always shook his head, knowing how hard it had been for him after the death of the old hunter. The girl had grown up in the taiga and loved it with all her heart. And the old, wise wolf, whom many in the village feared, did not inspire fear in her, but rather deep sympathy and some inexplicable, almost mystical kinship. Yereme, her grandfather, a tall, gray-haired old man with piercing, clear eyes that reflected the centuries-old wisdom of his ancestors, was carefully laying out the medicinal herbs he had gathered that morning on the wooden porch of his sturdy house when he heard the approaching roar of engines. His face, usually calm and good-natured, instantly darkened. He knew every resident of Zaimka and all the hunters in the surrounding area, and these vehicles were unfamiliar. Their provocative appearance and manner immediately aroused his suspicion. Borov approached the healer's house and grinned broadly, revealing a row of large teeth yellowed from tobacco. "Greetings, Father. We are geologists conducting research. Can you tell us, kind man, if there are any special ancient places around here, or perhaps any legends about unusual stones?" His voice was deliberately ingratiating, almost fawning. But behind this feigned politeness, Yereme sensed a steely, ruthless grip and a hidden threat. Jeremy, without changing his expression, slowly straightened up, putting down the bunch of St. John's wort. His gaze, direct and probing, met Borov's cold eyes. "Places of power, you say? Our entire taiga is one continuous place of power for those who know how to listen to it and understand it. We have many legends, all kinds of them, but not all of them are meant for strangers' ears, and not everyone can interpret them correctly." Borov grunted, his smile widening but becoming more unpleasant. "I see, old man. You are no simple man. It is not for nothing that they say you are the chief here in ancient knowledge and lore. But have you heard anything about the Stone of Power? They say it gives incredible power and authority to whoever possesses it. Perhaps you can tell me where to find it." Borov's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a predatory, greedy gleam flashed in them. Alenka, who had approached silently and was now standing behind her grandfather, pressed herself fearfully against his broad shirt, which smelled of herbs and smoke. She instinctively sensed the icy, clammy threat emanating from this man. The gray-haired man, watching the unfolding scene from the edge of the forest without moving, kept his eyes fixed on Borov. He recognized that look, the look of a hunter who had tracked down his long-awaited prey and was ready for the final, decisive pounce. A muffled, barely suppressed growl rose in his chest. Yereme replied calmly and with dignity, "The Stone of Power is just a fairy tale for visitors to stir up interest. The power of our taiga lies in its healing herbs, its pure waters, and its free spirit. We have stones in abundance, of all sizes and shapes, but they are all simple, ordinary pebbles." Borov smiled crookedly, his gaze hardening. Now, old man. Don't rush your answer. We're in no hurry. We'll live here for a while, look around, get to know the place. Maybe your memory will come back when we get to know each other better." He turned dramatically and, without saying goodbye, headed toward his people, throwing over his shoulder, "Make yourselves at home, guys. It's beautiful and wild here. I have a feeling we'll have a long and interesting job here." The off-road vehicles roared their engines and enveloped Yermolai's house in a cloud of gray smoke before rolling down the only village street, leaving behind deep ruts and a heavy sense of foreboding. Yermolai watched them go with a long, pensive gaze. He understood that these people had not come in peace, and their interest in the mythical Stone of Power was far from idle curiosity. Alenka squeezed his work-roughened hand even tighter, her little heart beating like a trapped bird. That evening, not only did the early taiga twilight descend on Zaimka, but also a sticky, suffocating fear of the unknown. The gray-haired man did not stray far from the village. He lay down in the thick thickets of willow trees on the steep bank of the river, from where he could clearly see the witch doctor's house and the place on the outskirts where, judging by the noise, the strangers had stopped. His wolf heart beat fast and anxiously. He knew, instinctively felt, that he had to be on guard. Memories of Mikhalich, of his boundless kindness and warmth, mingled with a growing, inexplicable anxiety for little Alenka, who, without knowing it, had become for the old, lonely wolf the last thin thread connecting him to the vanished world of humans, a world where there was friendship and loyalty. Night fell on the taiga, black and moonless, enveloping the village in a thick veil of silence, broken only by the occasional crackling of branches in the cooling stoves and the distant hooting of an owl. The last lights in the village had long since gone out. Only in the last house, where the uninvited guests had settled, did the dim light of a kerosene lamp burn for a long time, and muffled voices could be heard, interspersed with rough, drunken laughter. Yereme put Alenka to bed, reading her an old fairy tale about forest spirits, but he himself could not sleep. He sat by the window, covered with a calico curtain, listening to the nighttime noises, and his heart tightened with a heavy foreboding. He went over and over in his mind the old legends, the tales of his ancestors, the keepers of secret knowledge about the forces of nature, the Stone of Power. Yes, there was such a legend, vague, almost forgotten. But his grandfathers and great-grandfathers spoke of it allegorically as something intangible, the very essence, the soul of the taiga, its hidden power accessible only to those who live in harmony with it. The strangers, however, were obviously looking for a very specific, tangible artifact that they believed would give them power and wealth. Closer to midnight, everything fell silent in the bandit's house. The gray-haired man lay motionless in his hiding place, becoming part of the night landscape. His keen hearing picked up the slightest sounds, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the quiet splashing of fish in the river, the distant, barely discernible cry of a night bird. And then suddenly, a new sound, sharp and discordant with the nighttime symphony of the taiga. The quiet, barely audible creak of the gate at Yereme's house. Then, the almost weightless rustle of stealthy footsteps on the trampled grass. The wolf tensed all his muscles, his body becoming a taut string. 3 dark, vague figures emerged from the deep shadows of the old, crooked barn where the strangers had left their cars, and moved silently, like ghosts, toward the medicine man's house. The gray-haired man recognized them by their scent without fail: Borov, Kalist, and Nemoy. Their intentions were as clear as day, and this clarity made the old wolf's blood run cold. Cold, calculating rage boiled in his chest. He wanted to let out a menacing, warning growl, rush at his enemies, sweep them out of his way. But some inner voice honed by years of survival in a merciless struggle, stopped him. An instinct as ancient as the taiga itself told him that an open confrontation now, when there were 3 of them and they were armed, would be disastrous. They had weapons, deadly and merciless. And he was alone. The next moment there was a short, dry crack, the sound of a door being carefully pried open. Then there was a muffled, strangled cry from Yeremai, a brief, furious struggle, and then silence, even more ominous than before. The gray-haired man couldn't stand it any longer. Forgetting his caution for a moment, he jumped out of his hiding place and darted toward the house like a silent, swift shadow. He managed to see Borov, breathing heavily, dragging the struggling, crying Alenka out of the house, her little face contorted with horror. The whip, grinning cynically, roughly shoved the desperately struggling girl into one of the cars. Yeremai, bound hand and foot, lay on the threshold, helplessly watching what was happening. "Faster, damn it! Faster!" Borov hissed, looking around. The gray-haired man let out a low, guttural roar full of rage and menace and rushed forward. He had almost reached the car when Mute, turning at the sound, raised his hand lightning fast. A deafening shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past the wolf's ear with a nasty squeal, singeing his fur and leaving a burning mark on his skin. The gray-haired man instinctively recoiled, pain and rage momentarily blinding him. A second shot sent him flying even further, into the saving shadow of the spreading fir trees. The car roared away, kicking up clods of mud, and disappeared into the darkness, taking Alenka with it. The gray-haired man was left alone, watching her go with a look of unquenchable vengeance burning in his eyes. The smell of gunpowder, the acrid smell of Alenka's fear, and the hateful, alien smell of the bandits mixed into a suffocating, disgusting cocktail. He had been defeated, unable to protect her. But this was only the beginning. The old wolf's fury, driven deep down for a moment, was just beginning to awaken, preparing to burst out with all its primitive, crushing force. With the first timid rays of dawn coloring the eastern edge of the sky in soft pink and pearly tones, Yeremai, with incredible effort, freed himself from the tight ropes with which the bandits had hastily but firmly bound him and roused the entire sleepy village. His voice, usually calm and measured, now rang with anger, despair, and barely restrained tears. The news of the daring abduction of Alenka, the beloved of all, struck Zaimka like a sudden thunderclap in a clear sky. The men, few in number but strong, grabbed their old rifles, axes, and pitchforks, ready to immediately set off in pursuit and punish the villains. But Yermolai, barely controlling himself, stopped them with a wave of his hand. "The tracks lead to Black Urga," he said, pointing to the faint but clear imprints of wide tires disappearing into the depths of the impenetrable taiga, toward a gloomy, swampy tract of land. "Even the most desperate among you won't go there unless you absolutely have to. It's a trap, believe me. They're waiting for us to rush headlong after them and fall right into their clutches, or worse, perish in those swamps." Black Urga was the name given by the locals to a vast, gloomy, swampy, and almost impassable section of the taiga, which had been the subject of the worst rumors for centuries. It was said that people and animals died there without a trace, that it was easy to get lost even during the day and perish irretrievably in the quagmire or windbreak. A primal, almost superstitious fear froze the faces of the stern village men. But Sadoy knew no such fear when it came to those who were dear to him, those for whom he felt responsible. As soon as dawn broke, he was already on the trail. Alenka's scent, so familiar, so dear, alarmingly sweet, mixed with the acrid, alien smell of the bandits and their rumbling vehicles, guided him confidently, like an invisible thread. He paid no attention to the cries of the people gathering at Yeremai's house, to their confused bustle. He had one clear and unyielding goal: to find the girl and save her. He moved quickly but surprisingly silently, his powerful paws seemingly not touching the ground, carrying him easily along the forest path winding among the ancient trees. His instincts, honed by thousands of years of merciless struggle for survival by his wild ancestors, worked flawlessly, with the precision of the most perfect mechanism. He read the tracks like an open, fascinating book. Here the car had slowed down, overcoming a steep incline. Here someone had gotten out, leaving a faint but clear imprint of a heavy boot on the damp ground. He saw what was invisible to the human eye and heard what was beyond the limits of human hearing. The taiga was his home, his element, his ally. And now, he was going to use all the knowledge he had accumulated over his long life. All his unspent strength, all his fierce hatred to severely punish those who dared to disturb its centuries-old peace, and take away from him the little that still connected him to the vanished world of warmth and human kindness. The trail led deeper and deeper into the gloomy, silent forest. The sun rose higher and higher, but its rays barely penetrated the dense emerald canopy of the trees. Here, below, eternal twilight and cold dampness reigned. The air was heavy, still, saturated with the thick smells of rotten leaves, mushroom decay, and stagnant swamp water. The gray-haired man knew that the bandits had not chosen this deadly path by accident. They hoped that here, in this impenetrable wilderness, no one would catch up with them or dare to pursue them. They were cruelly mistaken. The bandits' off-road vehicles, despite their increased cross-country capability, struggled to make their way along the washed-out, broken logging road, which with every kilometer resembled more and more a general direction than a path. Borov sat behind the wheel of the lead vehicle, his broad, fleshy face grim and focused. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Alenka, who was sitting in the back seat next to Klist. The girl cowered silently, her huge eyes wide with terror and shock, watching the trees, bushes, and bumps flash by the dirty window. Trying to hide his own nervousness, Whip attempted to flirt with her, making lewd jokes, but she did not respond, only clenching the smooth river pebbles she had managed to pick up unnoticed in the village, near the porch of her house, more tightly in her small, sweaty fist. Noom, as always, was silent, his massive body almost motionless, his gaze fixed on the window. But it seemed that he saw nothing in front of him, immersed in his own thoughts, known to no one. "Soon this damn swamp will begin, Borov," List muttered, fidgeting nervously in his seat. "I marked this place on the map yesterday. It's a death trap. Maybe we should forget about this shortcut. The map shows a detour, about 50 kilometers, of course, but it's safer. We'll be able to cross on dry ground." Borov cut him off sharply without turning around. "Shut up, Klist, and stop complaining. I said we're going straight through the swamp. It's faster that way. And when the old man finds out that his beloved granddaughter is in a place like this, he'll break down faster and tell us everything. And these village fools wouldn't dare stick their noses in here. They're too scared." The gray-haired man, who had been following them closely at a safe but sufficient distance to observe, suddenly smelled the sharp, characteristic odor of mud, rotten grass, and stagnant water. A swamp. He knew this place well. An old, half-rotten causeway, once laid by lumberjacks to transport timber, had long since fallen into disrepair. And now a vast, treacherous swamp stretched out here, capable of swallowing an unwary traveler or even a large animal in a matter of minutes. Without wasting any time, the wolf changed direction slightly, easily and silently, running ahead along a barely visible animal trail. He found a place where the tracks from the cars deviated slightly from the barely discernible but still more or less solid strip of earth left over from the old causeway. With quick, precise movements of his powerful paws, he began to cover the real tracks, creating false ones that led slightly to the side, straight into the heart of the sticky, squelching quagmire. Then he returned to his position and, merging with the thick growth of tall ferns, lay in wait, watching patiently. Soon, around the bend, SUVs appeared, their engines roaring hoarsely. The first car, driven by Borov, moved relatively confidently for a while. But then its wheels began to spin treacherously. Borov cursed under his breath and pressed harder on the gas pedal. The car roared even louder, desperately spinning its wheels, but only dug deeper into the sticky, viscous sludge. The second car, following behind, tried to pass the first, but immediately fell into the same treacherous trap. "Damn it! Fuck!" Borov yelled, struggling to get out of the cab. "What the hell is going on here?" His feet were instantly ankle-deep in cold, squelching swamp mud. Whip and Mute also got out of their cars, struggling to move through the quicksand, which seemed to be sucking them deeper and deeper. "I told you, Borov, this place is doomed. I warned you." Whip whined, his face contorted with fear and disgust. "Shut up!" Borov barked, his face red with rage. "Get the girl out. We'll go on foot. We'll get the cars later, if we can." They struggled to pull the frightened, trembling Alenka out of the car. The girl almost fell into the mud, but Klist roughly grabbed her by the arm, squeezing her wrist painfully. The gray-haired man saw everything. His first tactical move had worked perfectly. The cars were immobilized. Now they would walk, and he could lead them as he pleased, directing them along the route he wanted. He was in no hurry to attack. Time was now on his side, not theirs. The bandits, abandoning their cars stuck fast in the marshy quicksand, set off on foot, cursing the swamp, the taiga, and their failed expedition. Borov, limping slightly after his unsuccessful jump from the cab, walked ahead, breathing heavily and clutching his pistol in his sweaty hand. His face, covered with mud and sweat, was contorted with anger and impotent rage. Klist, constantly stumbling and cursing, dragged the exhausted Alenka behind him, who could barely keep up, falling to her knees every few steps. Neum, as silent and sullen as ever, brought up the rear of their small procession, his short but powerful legs pounding heavily and his small eyes darting nervously from side to side. They were wet to the waist, covered in mud from the swamp, angry and hungry. The gray-haired man followed them like an invisible, incorporeal shadow, keeping to the leeward side so that his distinctive wolf-like scent would not reach their sensitive nostrils. Now he was the absolute master of the situation. He knew this part of the taiga like the back of his hand, every overgrown path, every blind ravine, every animal den. He decided not just to pursue them, wearing them down physically, but to break their will, to make them wander aimlessly, to rob them of their last ounce of strength and what remained of their former confidence. He led them not along relatively straight, albeit overgrown, human trails, but along old, almost disappeared bear tracks littered with windfall, where they had to constantly climb over slippery, fallen trunks of centuries-old trees and push their way through thick, prickly thickets of rose hips and wild raspberries. Their speed dropped sharply, almost to zero. The sun was already noticeably sinking toward the west, painting the sky in crimson tones, when the bandits, completely exhausted, literally collapsed on a small clearing overgrown with tall grass. "That's it, rest, damn it," Borov croaked, leaning heavily on the trunk of the nearest pine tree. "We're not going any further today. Our legs are about to fall off. Build a fire if you can, and keep the smoke down." While Klist and Nemoy cursed and tried to light a fire from damp, barely smoldering branches, Sedoy began his carefully planned psychological attack. He moved a safe distance away from the clearing and let out a long, mournful, soul-chilling howl. The sound, reflected many times by the dense wall of trees, rolled through the evening forest like a powerful wave, causing the bandits to involuntarily shudder and freeze. "What the hell was that?" asked Whip nervously, his voice betraying him, his eyes darting fearfully around the bushes. "A wolf, you idiot," muttered Borov, trying to maintain his composure, although his heart skipped a beat. "Just a regular forest wolf. What are you scared of, you girl?" But before he could finish, another howl rang out from the other side, much closer than the first, lower, more guttural, and clearly threatening. Then a third, very close by, with a distinct growl and a deep, furious snarl. It was Gray, using his impeccable knowledge of the area and the acoustics of the forest, to skillfully create the illusion that they were surrounded by an entire pack of angry wolves. The bandits were seriously alarmed. The mute instinctively grabbed the handle of his long hunting knife. Whip, with a trembling hand, pulled his pistol from its holster. Even Borov, usually imperturbable, felt extremely uncomfortable under these invisible but palpable glances. He fired several shots at random into the gathering darkness, but the bullets only clicked meaninglessly against the branches and disappeared without a trace into the thick undergrowth. Alenka, sitting by the barely smoldering, smoking fire, listened to these sounds with bated breath. In this polyphonic howl, she thought she heard something painfully familiar, something that gave her a faint but persistent hope. Maybe it was Gray. Maybe he had come to rescue her. This thought, like a thin ray of light in the pitch darkness, gave her a little strength. She began to look around even more carefully, trying to memorize the road and landmarks, and unnoticed by her captors but understood by an experienced forest dweller, she left tiny marks. A twig broken in a special way, known only to her and her grandfather. A small stone of an unusual shape or color, placed in a conspicuous place at the roots of a large tree. She knew that her grandfather Yeremei had taught her this for a reason when they went to the forest together to gather herbs and berries. The night passed in painful, nervous tension. The bandits hardly slept a wink, startling at every rustle, every crack of a twig in the forest, and the howling that resumed from time to time, which Sedoy skillfully directed from one side to the other, not allowing them to relax or feel safe for a moment. In the morning, they looked even more exhausted, haggard and angry than the day before. They had almost no food left. The meager supplies in their backpacks had been almost completely submerged along with the cars in the cursed swamp, and the berries and mushrooms they had found in a hurry could not satisfy their agonizing hunger. Borov, despite his own exhaustion, rudely hurried his assistants, instinctively understanding that every hour lost, every day of delay, worked against them, reducing their chances of success and increasing the risk of being caught. "Move, you good-for-nothings," he growled, kicking Kalist, who couldn't get up. "We need to get to the old geologist's base as quickly as possible. According to this crappy map, there should be an abandoned hideout with canned food and maybe even a working radio. And from there, it's just a stone's throw to the cave where the stone is hidden." Alenka, despite her extreme fatigue, hunger, and unabated fear, continued her quiet, inconspicuous work. She noticed that Klist, who was now walking beside her, had become much less attentive, his eyes darting fearfully from side to side, his hands trembling slightly from nervous exhaustion. Nimi was still sullenly silent, but his broad shoulders were slumped, his back hunched, and he was breathing heavily, with a whistling sound. Only Borov seemed to retain his animalistic, indomitable energy, driven forward by an all-consuming, insane obsession to find the mythical stone of power, which he believed would make him omnipotent. Gray-haired, watching them closely from his hiding place, he saw that his tactic of gradual exhaustion and psychological pressure was bearing fruit. The bandits were on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Their will was almost broken, and their strength was running out. He continued to herd them like an experienced shepherd, not allowing them to stray from the route he wanted them to take, which led them not along the shortest, but along the most difficult and exhausting road to an abandoned geological base. He knew that there, at the base, among the dilapidated buildings, he would have much more opportunity to carry out the next, more decisive part of his plan. The geologist's base was a depressing sight. A few crooked, half-rotten barracks with broken windows and collapsed roofs, and the rusting, ugly skeleton of some long-abandoned drilling rig. The place looked gloomy, deserted, and sinister. "Well, it looks like we're here," Borov croaked, gasping for breath and looking around eagerly. "Search every last corner. According to my calculations, there should be a cache of canned food and, if we're lucky, a radio." Klist and Nemoy, barely able to move their legs, reluctantly began to search the dilapidated barracks, peering into the dark, damp rooms. Alenka Borov was roughly pushed into an old, crooked shed, the door of which he propped open with a heavy, charred log to be on the safe side. The girl was left alone in the oppressive semi-darkness, surrounded by old, moldy junk, cobwebs, and the acrid smell of mold and mouse droppings. But she did not cry. She knew she had to be strong, as her grandfather had taught her, and she stubbornly believed that help would surely come. Gray-haired, hiding in the thickets of wild currants not far from the base, he watched the bandits camp closely. He saw which shed Alenka had been locked in. He saw how, after a short search, the bandits found several cans of old, swollen canned food in one of the cellars, and greedily pounced on the food like wild animals. He waited patiently for nightfall. Night was his time, the time for decisive action, when thick, impenetrable darkness finally enveloped the taiga, and the bandits, exhausted by the day's heavy march, the remnants of the food they had found, and the nervous tension of the last few days, finally calmed down and fell into a restless sleep. Sadoy began to act. He moved with incredible, almost supernatural caution, his soft paws stepping so lightly and silently that not a single dry twig or pebble crunched beneath them. He carefully circled the improvised camp, accurately determining by smell and sound where his enemies were sleeping. Borov, as the leader, settled in a relatively intact barrack, apparently a former office. Klist and Nemoy, like bloodhounds, took up positions in another barrack, closer to the shed where they were holding Alenka. Sadoy decided to start with their meager food supplies. The bandits had left their tattered backpacks with the remains of their food and a few cans of food they had found right at the entrance to their barracks, not even bothering to take them inside. Wolf crept up to them silently, like a shadow. With one precise, powerful movement of his strong jaws, he bit through the leather straps of one backpack, then the other. The meager contents, a few stale crackers, a handful of dried meat, and a couple of cans, spilled onto the ground. He did not eat himself. Now was not the time to satisfy his own hunger, which had been tormenting him for more than a day. He grabbed a few cans of food and silently dragged them away from the camp, hiding them securely under a thick, thorny juniper bush. Then he returned and set about the rest. The bread, which he tore into small pieces, the few remaining grains of cereal. He methodically scattered everything throughout the forest, in different directions from the camp, so that it would be impossible to gather. His next, equally important task was to find the radio. He had seen Borov fiddling with it for a long time that afternoon, trying unsuccessfully to pick up a signal, but to no avail. Now it lay on a roughly knocked-together table next to Borov's bed in the barracks where he slept. It was extremely risky to sneak into the barracks where the gang leader was, but it was vital. The gray-haired man froze at the door, listening. Borov's deep, even wheezing breath indicated that he was fast asleep, exhausted from the day's worries. Volk found a small crack under the door, wide enough for his emaciated but flexible body to squeeze through. He slipped inside like a wisp of smoke without making a sound. The sharp smell of human sweat, tobacco, and weapons hit his nostrils, but he paid no attention to it. The radio. There it was, lying on the table, glinting dimly in the moonlight, streaming through a hole in the roof. He took it carefully, almost tenderly, in his teeth, trying not to damage the fragile plastic casing. And as silently as he had entered, he made his way out. He carried the radio far away from the camp, to a barely visible animal trail leading in the opposite direction from where he thought the cave the bandits were looking for was located. Before finally disappearing, he did something else, something very important. He silently crept up to the old shed where Alenka was languishing in darkness and fear. He couldn't free her now. It would be too noisy and dangerous and might scare the bandits away before they returned. But he quietly, almost inaudibly, scratched the dilapidated wooden door with his claw, making the same familiar sound she had known since childhood. The same sound he sometimes made at Mikhailik's hut when he came for the food left for him. Alenka, who had not slept, curled up in a ball in the corner of the shed, heard this quiet but familiar scratching sound. Her little heart beat faster and faster. "Said, it's him. He's here. He's nearby." She couldn't answer, afraid of attracting the attention of the bandits, who could wake up from any noise. But this small, barely perceptible message from her faithful forest friend filled her with new, desperate hope. Gray, satisfied that his nighttime diversion had been carefully and successfully completed, disappeared into the safety of the forest as quietly as he had appeared. He knew that the morning would be very unpleasant for the bandits and full of unpleasant surprises. The morning sun, lazily breaking through the sparse, ragged clouds, illuminated the abandoned geological base, but brought neither warmth nor joy to its temporary inhabitants. The first traces of the night's destruction were discovered by Klist, who, staggering from weakness, left the barracks to relieve himself. Borov, damn you, come here quickly," he yelled in a wild, breaking voice when he saw the torn backpacks and the remains of their meager supplies scattered all over the clearing. Borov, sleepy and angry, jumped out of his hiding place, buttoning his pants as he ran. Seeing the scene of utter devastation, he froze for a moment, then his face turned red with rage. "What the hell happened here, you bastards?" he roared, his voice breaking into a hoarse howl. "You brainless bastards! You ate everything during the night and scattered it around to cover your tracks? I'll tear you to pieces myself." Whip and Mute, who had run out after him, looked at each other in fear. "But we just woke up, Borov. I swear to you by all that is holy, it wasn't us. We wouldn't dare." Whip stammered, his face white with fear of the leader's anger. Borov looked around furiously, his predatory gaze settling on the ground. Huge, clear, fresh wolf paw prints were everywhere around the remains of their camp. "A wolf?" he hissed through clenched teeth, his fists clenched until they cracked. "That damned devilish wolf. Is he mocking us? He's playing with us like a cat with a mouse." Then he noticed that the radio was missing from the table. "The radio! Where's the radio, I ask you?" His voice rose again to a deafening scream. Animal panic began to grip the bandits. They were left with almost no food, no communication with the outside world, in the heart of a hostile, unfamiliar taiga, pursued by some incredibly intelligent, cunning, and daring beast. "It's not just a beast, Borov," Klist said in a trembling, broken voice, his eyes filled with superstitious horror. It's as if it understands everything, reads our every thought. It's leading us somewhere on purpose, luring us somewhere. This isn't just a wolf. It's some kind of werewolf, a forest spirit." Borov slammed his fist against the log wall of the barracks so hard that splinters flew everywhere. "Shut up, Klist, don't panic. I know he's leading us, I don't need you to tell me. But he won't stop me. Neither he nor the devil himself. We'll find that stone, whatever it takes. And I'll settle the score with that wolf myself. I'll skin him alive." His eyes burned with a mad, unhealthy fire. He knew that they had less and less time. They had to hurry before they were completely exhausted or before some other misfortune befell them. "Get ready immediately," he ordered his dejected assistants. "Let's go to the cave, immediately. And don't let that girl fall behind, understand? If anything happens, I'll shoot her on the spot." He roughly pulled Alenka out of the barn. The girl, though greatly frightened by his animal fury, remained surprisingly steadfast. She had seen numerous traces of the Grey One around the camp, and her small but brave heart was filled with quiet, secret joy and hope. Her faithful friend was nearby. He hadn't abandoned her. He was fighting for her as best he could. The bandits, hungry, angry, exhausted, and scared to death, set off again. Their steps were no longer as confident and bold as before. They constantly looked around, shuddering at every rustle, every breath of wind. The gray-haired man followed them closely, keeping a safe distance, but never losing sight of them for a moment. He saw their fear, their growing confusion and despair. He knew that his plan was working, that he was slowly but surely sapping their strength and will. But the most important, the most dangerous test was yet to come. The Cave of the Ancestors, as old Yereme called it, was, according to legend, a place of great power, but also a place of great danger. And the gray-haired man had to be ready for anything, for any turn of events. The path to the mysterious Cave of the Ancestors proved to be even more difficult and exhausting than all the previous passages. The terrain became increasingly wild, rocky, and impassable. Deprived of their powerful vehicles, the bandits had to scramble up steep, crumbling slopes covered with slippery moss, squeeze through narrow, rock-strewn crevices, and wade through icy, turbulent streams. Borov, driven by his insane, all-consuming obsession, did not give his exhausted men a moment's rest or even the slightest respite. Alenka, completely exhausted, could barely move her numb legs. But Klist, whom Borov had ordered to keep a close eye on her, dragged her roughly and unceremoniously by the arm, ignoring her quiet moans and tears. The gray-haired man followed them relentlessly, like a shadow, becoming their inevitable fate, the living embodiment of taiga justice. He no longer hid as carefully as before. Sometimes the bandits noticed his gray shadow flitting among the trees or heard his low, guttural growl, which made their blood run cold and their hair stand on end. It was an integral part of his plan to keep them in a constant, nerve-wracking state of tension, not allowing them to feel safe for a single second, to break their will before the decisive battle. Finally, after several long, endless hours of exhausting travel, they came to the foot of a high, sheer cliff, in which the narrow, irregularly shaped entrance to the cave blackened like a wound. The place looked gloomy and sinister. Huge boulders covered with gray lichen lay around, like the bones of ancient giants, and from the cave itself came a deathly cold, dampness, and some kind of incomprehensible, disturbing smell. "There it is. I think it's there," whispered Borov, his voice trembling with excitement, his eyes feverishly shining. "The cave of the ancestors. The legendary stone of power is somewhere in there. I can feel it." He turned sharply to his exhausted companions. "Whip, you're the freshest, so you stay here with the girl. Guard the entrance so that no creature can get in. If anyone shows up, shoot to kill without hesitation. Mute, you come with me and cover my back." Whip nodded nervously, his face as pale as a sheet. He clearly did not want to be left alone with this terrifying taiga and its invisible but omnipresent predator. The Mute silently checked his long, sharp knife with a practiced movement. Borov, without wasting another second of precious time, stepped decisively into the dark, inviting mouth of the cave. Nemo, pausing for a moment, followed him. The dim beam of Borov's flashlight picked out the wet, slippery, slime-covered walls from the primeval darkness, on which ancient, mysterious drawings, almost erased by time, were visible here and there. The gray-haired man had been waiting for this moment. As soon as Borov and the Mute disappeared into the depths of the dark cave, he quickly but silently emerged from his hiding place. Seeing the huge, experienced wolf slowly but surely coming straight toward him, Callist let out a strangled cry and frantically raised his pistol. But he didn't even have time to aim, let alone fire. Gray covered the distance between them with a lightning-fast, perfectly executed leap. This was not just an attack by a wild beast. It was a calculated, deadly strike by an experienced, cold-blooded predator. His powerful jaws closed with incredible force on Whip's leg, just above the knee. There was a disgusting, dry crack, the sound of breaking human bone and tearing tendons. Whip collapsed to the ground with a wild, inhuman scream, dropping his pistol, which flew off to the side. The gray-haired man did not finish him off, although he could have done so with a single movement. He merely jumped aside, his amber eyes burning with a cold, merciless fire. He had neutralized his enemy without killing him, leaving him to suffer in pain and fear. Alenka, taking advantage of the confusion and the fact that Callist no longer posed a threat to her, jumped away from the wounded bandit and, without hesitation, ran into the forest, away from this terrible, cursed place. She instinctively understood that Sadoy had given her this chance to escape, and she had to take it immediately. The wild, inhuman screams of Callist, writhing on the ground, echoed loudly and repeatedly through the narrow gorge, and reached the ears of Borov and Nemogo, who were already quite deep in the winding passages of the cave. "What's that noise?" Borov barked, stopping abruptly and listening. "Callist, what the hell is going on there? Answer me!" They heard another long cry, a mixture of pain, horror, and despair. Borov cursed and, forgetting about the Stone of Power for a moment, rushed back toward the cave exit. Nemoy, like a faithful dog, followed him. The scene that met their eyes when they ran out of the darkness into the light made Borov growl with rage like a wounded bear. Callist, pale as death, writhed on the ground, clutching his shattered, unnaturally twisted leg, his face contorted with unbearable pain. Alenka was nowhere to be seen. "Where's the girl? I'm asking you!" Borov yelled, hovering over the whimpering Callist. "What the hell happened to you? Did you fall asleep on guard duty, you bastard?" A wolf, huge, gray. It attacked from ambush. Whip moaned, stuttering and choking on his saliva. "The girl, she ran into the forest. I couldn't stop her." Borov slammed his fist against the rough rock, tearing the skin off his knuckles. "Damn it. It's all because of that wolf. Mute, go after the girl now, Quick, she can't have gone far. And you? He kicked Whip in the side with disgust. If you survive here alone, consider yourself lucky. I'm not going to drag you along. The mute, without saying a word, merely nodded his bull-like head, pulled his long knife from his belt, and, judging by the tracks, rushed in the direction where he thought Alenka might have fled. Borov, obsessed with his idea of the Stone of Power, which he thought was so close, turned back to the dark mouth of the cave. He was so close to his goal that he couldn't back down now, after everything he had been through. Rage, greed, and the anticipation of incredible power completely clouded what remained of his reason and caution. He took another determined step into the darkness, his flashlight nervously darting from side to side, picking out strange shadows from the gloom. But he did not know that Gray, his relentless pursuer, was already there, inside. The wolf, after watching Alenka with a worried look and making sure she was running in the right direction, toward the river where she would be easier to find, slipped into the cave before Borov, using another narrow, almost invisible side entrance known only to him and, perhaps, to old hunters. He knew this cave well. Mikhailich had shown it to him long ago, when Sadoy was young and strong, telling him old, half-forgotten legends about mountain spirits and hidden treasures. Now this knowledge, gained from the old hunter, would serve the cause of justice. Sadoy hid in one of the dark side passages, patiently waiting for Borov, when the bandit leader, lighting his way with a dim flashlight, passed by his hiding place. Sadoy let out a low, threatening, almost inhuman growl. Borov started in surprise and spun around, the beam of his lantern darting toward the sound, catching a glimpse of a pair of yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. "Who's there?" "You again, you wolf creature? I'll kill you anyway, you hear me? I'll kill you." He fired a shot into the darkness at random. The bullet ricocheted off the stone wall with a screech and disappeared somewhere deep inside. The gray-haired man, taking advantage of Borov's momentary hesitation, jumped out of his hiding place and rushed deeper into the cave, into its narrowest, most winding, and most dangerous passage. Borov, blinded by rage and thirst for revenge, did not hesitate and rushed after him. "Stop, you scum! You won't get away from me. I'll get you out of the ground." He crawled further and further, struggling to squeeze through narrow crevices, clinging to slippery ledges, not noticing that the wolf was skillfully and cold-bloodedly luring him into a deadly trap. Finally, he found himself in a small, damp cave, with only one very narrow, almost vertical passageway, which he could barely squeeze through. The gray-haired man was already waiting for him on the other side of the passageway. When Borov, panting and cursing everything under the sun, tried to squeeze through the narrow passage, he got stuck. His broad shoulders and powerful chest were wedged tightly between the cold, merciless stones. He tried to get out, jerked backward, then forward, but couldn't move an inch. Then he heard a growing rumble above him. The gray-haired man, having reached the top of the cave through another secret passage known only to him, let out a furious, triumphant roar and hurled a whole pile of unstable rocks and boulders at the exit where Borov was stuck. The rockfall was short but devastatingly powerful. Huge, heavy boulders fell down with a deafening crash, completely blocking the narrow passage. Borov was trapped, alone, in complete, absolute darkness, without the slightest chance of escape. His furious cries, threats, and curses quickly gave way to desperate, terrified screams, and then to a deaf, hopeless, gradually fading silence. Meanwhile, the mute, moving with surprising speed and agility for his massive, clumsy build, was rapidly catching up with the small, defenseless Alenka. The girl ran with all her remaining strength, her lungs burning, her legs buckling from exhaustion. But she knew she couldn't stop. However, her short, childish legs could not compete for long with the long, measured strides of her pursuer. The forest around her became sparser and lighter. And ahead, through the tree trunks, she could see a steep, precipitous bank above a wide, fast-flowing river. Alenka realized with despair that she had nowhere left to run. She stopped at the very edge of the cliff. Breathing heavily, her little heart pounding in her chest like a trapped bird ready to break free. Silent and breathing heavily, he emerged from behind the trees. His face, as always, impassive, almost stony, but in his small, deep-set eyes burned a cold, unkind flame. He slowly, unhurriedly approached the girl, playing with a long knife in his huge hand, which glinted in the sun. "Well, did you run far, little bird?" His voice, which Alenka heard for the first time in all this time, was unexpectedly hoarse, low, and extremely unpleasant. "Thought you could get away from us?" The girl closed her eyes, expecting the worst, her lips silently whispering her grandfather's name. And at that very critical moment, as if growing out of the ground itself, behind her back, completely silently, Gray appeared. He didn't make a sound, just stood there like an indestructible rock between the frightened Alenka and the approaching mute. Powerful, wounded, covered in dust and dirt, but unbroken and determined. The hair on his powerful mane slowly stood on end, revealing old, deep scars, evidence of countless battles. From his half-open mouth, exposing long, sharp fangs, a low, threatening roar escaped, turning into a guttural, soul-chilling roar. It was not just the roar of an enraged beast. It was the roar of the ancient, primeval taiga, its untamed fury, its centuries-old power. He froze in place, rooted to the spot. He saw before him not just a large wolf. He saw something greater, something frightening, the embodiment of an ancient, untamed force, merciless and almighty. In the beast's amber eyes, burning with an unearthly fire, he read his own inevitable sentence. Fear, animalistic, primal, clinging fear, the likes of which he had never felt in his life, paralyzed his limbs and his will. He remembered the mangled, writhing Hlista, who had mysteriously disappeared in Borov's cave, and all the strange, inexplicable, and terrifying events of the last few days. He suddenly realized with terrifying clarity that they had encountered something that was beyond them, something much stronger than their weapons, their cruelty, and their cunning. The knife fell with a soft thud from his weak, trembling hand. He slowly, awkwardly backed away, his eyes fixed on the wolf in utter terror. Then suddenly, as if propelled by a spring, he turned and ran. Away from that cursed, terrifying forest, away from that devilish, all-seeing beast. He ran without looking where he was going, breaking bushes, stumbling and falling, until his strength finally left him. The gray-haired man did not pursue him. He watched the bandit with a long, heavy, contemptuous gaze, then slowly turned to Alenka. The girl looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, in which fear, relief, and boundless gratitude were mixed. She took a few uncertain steps and cautiously, reverently embraced his powerful neck, burying her tear-stained face in his thick, coarse fur that smelled of the forest, smoke, and blood. "Thank you, Gray. Sweetheart. Thank you," she whispered, her small body shaking with sobs. The wolf gently, almost tenderly, nudged her tear-stained cheek with his cold, wet nose. His difficult, dangerous mission was almost complete. All that remained was to return the girl home. Gray, making sure that Alenka had calmed down a little and come to her senses, carefully but persistently led her back toward her native village. The road was long and difficult, but the girl, walking beside her mighty, shaggy savior, no longer felt the same all-consuming fear. She knew that she was now completely safe and under reliable protection. When they finally reached the edge of the forest in the evening, they were first noticed by the village boys playing nearby. "Look, look everyone, Alenka! Alenka is back, and with her, a wolf!" They shouted at the top of their voices, pointing in their direction. Soon, alarmed by the cries, the whole village, young and old, poured out into the street. The people froze in silent amazement, not believing their eyes when they saw Alenka walking toward them, staggering with fatigue but alive and unharmed, and next to her a huge, wounded wolf, covered in dried blood, but proud and unbroken. Yeremy was the first to rush toward them, pushing the crowd aside. With tears in his eyes, he hugged his beloved granddaughter tightly, then turned his gaze to the gray-haired man. There was no fear or surprise in his wise eyes, only deep, boundless respect and silent understanding. "Thank you, old friend," he said quietly but clearly, addressing the wolf as if he were a human being. "You saved her. You saved us all from great trouble." Alenka, having recovered somewhat from her ordeal and finding herself safe among familiar faces, told her grandfather and the villagers who had gathered around her everything that had happened to her during those terrible days. About her sudden abduction, her agonizing ordeal in the forest, the incredible cunning, courage, and fury of Gray, his desperate battle with the ruthless bandits, and the deadly trap in the cave. Her disjointed but detailed account left everyone present in a state of shock and awe. No one could believe that an ordinary, albeit very old and wise, forest wolf was capable of such almost human, meaningful, and strategically calculated actions. Yeremy listened attentively to his granddaughter and nodded slowly, his face serious and pensive. "I have always told you that the Stone of Power, whispered about in legends, is not just some magical stone or artifact. It is the very spirit of our taiga, its invisible but powerful protective force. And today, this great power, this primal fury of nature, has been embodied in you, Gray. You are the true guardian of these sacred places, their faithful and silent protector." Meanwhile, Yeremy remembered the radio, which, as it turned out, Sedoy had somehow managed not only to snatch from the bandits, but also to leave in the most conspicuous place, in the old, abandoned hut of the late Mikalish, as if knowing that the old healer would surely come there in search of clues or at least some kind of lead. The old man, who possessed not only a deep knowledge of medicinal herbs, but also extraordinary peasant wit and skilled hands, managed by some miracle to repair the damaged device and contact the distant district center, reporting the attack by the bandits and the kidnapping of the child. Soon, an armed police squad arrived in Zaimka, raising clouds of dust. They easily found the wounded man, who was in a semi-conscious state and constantly delirious, repeating something incoherent about a devilish werewolf and Borov buried in a rock. After a long and thorough search, based on Alenka's detailed account and Klist's confused but generally consistent testimony, the police officers discovered a cave blocked with stones. The fate of Borov, who remained there forever, was more than obvious. Nemago was declared wanted, but his traces were finally lost in the endless, impassable expanses of the old taiga. When all the commotion surrounding the arrival of the police and the investigation subsided, and the strangers from the city left the quiet village, Sedoy did not remain in the village among the people, even though many, especially the children, looked at him with admiration and tried to get closer. He sought neither gratitude, nor recognition, nor praise. His place was there, in the remote, gloomy forest that was his only real home. He once again became an invisible ghost of the taiga, its silent shadow. But now the inhabitants of Zaimka looked at him, and his rare footprints appearing on the outskirts, not with the former fearful apprehension, but with deep, almost superstitious respect and sincere gratitude. They understood that it was not just a wild beast living among them, but something much greater. Their unspoken protector, a wise guardian, the very embodiment of the harsh but just spirit of the ancient, untouched forest. Alenka, of course, did not forget her furry, four-legged savior. She continued to secretly bring him food, hidden from her grandfather, who understood everything and only nodded approvingly, leaving a bowl of still warm meat or a piece of bread in the usual place, at Mikalish's old, crooked hut. Sometimes, on quiet, windless, moonlit nights, standing on the porch of her cozy home and peering into the dark wall of the forest, she heard his distant, drawn-out howl. But now, there was no longer the same poignant longing and hopeless loneliness in that howl. It was the calm, confident and masterful voice of the rightful lord of the taiga, her faithful and vigilant guardian. The voice of one who remembered the old, long-gone times and stood unshakably in defense of the eternal, unwritten laws of harsh but just nature. Gray-haired, almost completely blending in with the thick shadows of the mighty trees, he slowly walked around his endless domain. His numerous old scars still ached with the changing weather, reminding him of the battles and dangers he had endured. But his spirit was strong and unbroken as ever. He knew that the world was fragile and changeable, and that evil could return at any moment, taking on a new, even more insidious form. But he also knew that as long as he lived, as long as his old but strong wolf heart beat, the taiga and its innocent inhabitants would not be left defenseless. The echoes of his mighty howl rang out long into the night, until dawn, over the sleeping, peaceful Zaimka, over the silent, snow-covered peaks of ancient cedars, and the dark, mysterious waters of the fast-flowing taiga rivers, an eternal, indelible reminder of the primal power, unfathomable wisdom, and unshakable justice that slumber in the very heart of the old taiga. And those few who knew how to listen and understand the language of nature heard in this piercing howl, not a threat or a challenge, but an unbreakable promise of protection, peace, and an eternal, unshakable order.